Here's a contrast issue that we're all likely to face from time to time. If we give any less exposure on the background of this shot, the birds are going to be hopelessly dark. If we give more exposure for the birds, then the background to some degree is going to be much lighter and possibly distracting. Now, traditionally speaking, our exposure wiggle room in these high contrast conditions has often been limited, but it's getting much easier now to deal with these issues. Let's take this image through its entire editing. First the global, and then the strategic editing. I'm going to begin here with a small crop, not too much. I want to take a little bit off the top, a little bit off the right to improve the composition, and I don't need all that space at the bottom, and it does take off a highlight there. I think I'm happy with what I've got there. I don't think I need much, if anything, off the left hand side. The enter key will commit that change. Now I need to be a bit aggressive, I think, with the highlights and shadows, so I'm going to drop the highlights completely down to the left and the shadows completely up to the right. Now that means the image looks a little bit pale and flat, so I'm going to drop the exposure a little bit and then take a little look at where I feel I need to go from here. Now I'd like to put a little more warmth into my image, so I'm going to just tweak the temperature a little bit to the right, not very much, just a little, and maybe a little bit of vibrance, but I think the colour's looking pretty good. But maybe I'll look at clarity because we've flattened the highlights and shadows, so mid-tone contrast is going to help the image. But when I double click that, you can see that it actually probably enhances the light areas a little bit, but I think I'm still going to live with that, and we'll deal with the light areas a little bit later. Now I'm going to switch to strategic editing via my masks, and I'm going to select the background. Now it's done a pretty good job, but it's also selected the tail of the bird on the left. So I'm going to hit the subtract button and choose my select objects. And I'm going to say to the software, please remove that bit. And there we have a pretty good start to what I want to do next. Let me turn that overlay off so we can see exactly what we're doing. I'm going to drop down the highlights. I'm going to drop down the exposure. I don't want to create a lot of contrast in the background because the birds are the important part. So I'll stay away from the blacks and the whites here, I think. Now that's not looking too bad at all. But I'm not finished with the background, so I don't want to turn to select the subjects yet. I want to do a little more work on that background. I think I could do with a gradient at the bottom, top, maybe even left and right. So I'm going to begin at the bottom. I'm going to touch the G key, shortcut key for the gradient, linear gradient, click and drag. Once again, I'm coming up over the tail of the bird, so I'm going to touch the V key to bring up the bounding box and just drop it down a bit. I don't think that little bit of encroachment is going to be that much of a problem because I just want to darken that bottom bit a little bit. Well, maybe it could be because I'd like to come up further. So I'm going to turn that overlay on. I'm going to bring it up more, and I think what I'll do is subtract. And once again, I'll select the objects and I'll say, please remove that. And please remove that too. That's better. Now perhaps I can lean on this slider a little more. Maybe even a little blacks. You get the idea. Let me turn that overlay off. But I'm still having a little problem at the bottom right corner. So maybe I'll turn to a different mask in a few moments, but once again I'm going to hit the G key for another graduated filter or linear mask, click and drag. Once again we've got a problem with the birds, so we're going to subtract the subject. And there we have it. Let me just take that top down a little bit without affecting my birds. Now you can see how the left and the right does look a little bit weaker. So G key again, click and drag. Not going to come too far onto the bird this time. So maybe I'll get away with that. Just a little darkening on the right. And then another G key touched and click and drag on the left. You can see these tools are very quick and easy to use, but I want to drag this down a little darker. But of course now I'm making that top part too dark and the bottom left. Now once again, let's go to subtract, brush. I've got my brush flow around 20. You can see the size of the brush. So I can brush over this area and I can remove the worst of that darkening in the areas I don't want it. And now we need to just think about what we're going to do next. I'd like to have a go at the highlight down at the bottom right corner. To do that, I'm going to go to my masks once again, but I'm going to use shortcut keys. K is the shortcut key for a brush. What do I want to do here? I want to drop down the exposure. It's a little bit blue down there. So I may take some of that off by just moving the temperature a little to the right. And with the brush adjusted, I'm just going to brush over that area and see what the effect is. Not looking too bad. It's taking it down quite nicely. I'll bring that temperature up a little bit and maybe I'll bring that slider a little bit to the left. I think that's subdued enough. Now what I may do is, while I've got that mask selected, I may just have a go at just a few brushes over this area here, not too much, and maybe even a little bit over this area here. This is the worst area, but the good thing about this highlight is it's very close to the bird, so it's not dragging us too far away. But I'm doing a little bit of work on that, and I think I'd like to do a little more, but I don't want to move the sliders because I've already used it over on the right and the bottom corner. So why don't I just hit the K key again and make another brush mask. I can take the exposure down a bit more and I can move my brush over this area, just being careful just to take the worst of that away. And if I feel there's one or two areas that also need a touch, then I can do those maybe at the same time. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the birds, and I think what we'll do here is we'll select the subject. Now I expect it to do a pretty good job, but it's left that tail feather of the bird on the left. So once again I can ask the software to add using the select objects, and I can say please include this bit. Sorry, I got that little wrong, so I'll do that again for you. Doesn't matter how many times we do this. That looks better. So what I'm going to do here is to lift the shadows. But I want as much contrast into the birds as I can get. Do I need them very slightly brighter? Maybe. Something like that. We're all going to choose something a little different, aren't we? And do I want the temperature increased a little bit? Again, personal choices. But I think that looks pretty good. But what I may do is just lift the eyes and the beak even a little more. And I'll do that with a brush too. And this is why shortcut keys are so good, because as I touch the K, I've got the brush instantly. I know what I want to do. Looking at the bird's faces, it's a little bit of shadow, it's a little bit of exposure. With my flow very low, well, let's move this up a little bit. I can start to just brush over this area. And you can see I'm just lifting the tones here, and I may even let them spill down onto the chest of the bird because those feathers are reasonably interesting. Just making sure that the sparkle in the eyes is not lost. Control 0 will fit the image on screen, and maybe we need a timeout just to consider what we've done so far. Now, as you can see here, I've opened up the image into Photoshop. I've added the AI noise suppression, and once it was open in Photoshop, I've used the healing brush just to remove one or two tiny little distractions, including that tiny branch up at the top right. So now let's take a look at where we started from, because when we view the original image, it does look a little bit of a hill to climb. Now, as we look between the two images and we consider how far we've come, we've used quite a few masks, but it doesn't matter how many we use as long as we get the result and we've got an acceptable result for image quality. If nothing else, when we view the original, it should be a reminder for us to be very careful with images that we choose to delete. Who knows what Adobe will come up with next? Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that we have editing perfection here. And if I was taking this shot again, I would have bracketed the exposures because the birds were there long enough for me to do that. But contrast and our ability to deal with it has never been easier, and we've made a massive difference here. I'll see you next time.